Years after losing his wife and daughter, Henry Valmont's grief-stricken world was shattered when he met Anna Clara, a girl who looked exactly like his late child. But as he uncovered her identity, life's greatest challenge awaited. Could love and faith conquer the impossible? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Henry Valmont stood at the window of his huge mansion, looking at the empty garden where his daughter Caroline used to play. It had been 5 years since she died from cancer, and the pain was still there, fresh as ever. The house felt too big, too quiet without her laughter. "Mr. Valmont," his assistant Rachel called from the door. "The doctor is here with your test. Results." Henry turned around slowly. At 45, he was one of the richest men in town, but money hadn't bought him happiness. His wife Maria had died right after giving birth to Caroline, and now he had lost his daughter too. The fancy furniture and expensive paintings meant nothing to him anymore. "Send him in," Henry said, sitting behind his big desk. Dr. Peterson walked in carrying a brown envelope. He had been Henry's doctor for 20 years, and his face already told the story before he even opened his mouth. "I'm sorry, Henry. The tests confirm it. You won't be able to have any more children." The words hit Henry like a punch to the stomach. He had been trying to date again, hoping to start a new family. But now even that dream was dead. "So that's it?" Henry asked, his voice shaking. "The Valmont family ends with me?" "There are other options," Dr. Peterson said carefully. "Have you ever considered adoption?" Henry hadn't. The idea of raising someone else's child had never crossed his mind, but now, sitting in his empty mansion with the weight of loneliness crushing him, he started to think about it. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. He walked through the halls of his mansion, stopping at Caroline's room. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The pink walls, the stuffed animals on the bed, the ballet shoes she loved so much. She had been only 12 when the cancer took her. He sat on her small bed, picking up her favorite teddy bear. "What should I do, sweetheart?" he whispered to the empty room. "Should I try to find someone to carry on our name?" The next morning, Henry made a decision. He called his lawyer, Thomas, and asked him to look into adoption agencies. Thomas was surprised. Henry Valmont had always been all about family bloodlines and legacy. "Are you sure about this?" Thomas asked. "The press will have a field day when they find out." "I don't care anymore," Henry said. "This house needs life again. I need someone to care for." Thomas made some calls and found St. Mary's Orphanage on the outskirts of town. It was a small place run by nuns, away from the media's prying eyes. Perfect for someone like Henry who valued his privacy. "I'll go there tomorrow," Henry decided, alone. That evening, as Henry sat in his home office looking at old family photos, his housekeeper, Mrs. Martinez, brought him some tea. "I heard about your plans to adopt," she said kindly. She had been with the family since before Caroline was born. "I think it's wonderful. This house needs children's laughter again." Henry looked at the old woman who had helped raise his daughter. "What if I can't love another child like I loved Caroline?" Mrs. Martinez patted his hand gently. "The heart has an amazing ability to grow, Mr. Henry. Love isn't like money. You don't run out of it by giving it away." The next morning, Henry got into his black Mercedes and drove to St. Mary's Orphanage. The place was simple but well kept, with a small garden where children played. As he walked toward the entrance, a strange feeling came over him, like something important was about to happen. Sister Mary Catherine, the head nun, welcomed him warmly. "Mr. Valmont, we're honored to have you here. Would you like to meet some of our children?" Henry nodded, following her through the corridors. They passed rooms full of young children playing and laughing. But Henry felt lost. How would he know which child to choose? Then, as they turned a corner, he saw her, a teenage girl sitting by a window reading a book. Henry's heart stopped. The world seemed to freeze around him. The girl looked exactly like Caroline. She had the same dark hair, the same gentle eyes, even the same way of tucking her hair behind her ear. For a moment, Henry thought he was seeing a ghost. Who is she?" he managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. "That's Anna Clara," Sister Mary Catherine said. "She's 15. She's been with us since she was a baby. Would you like to meet her?" Henry couldn't speak. He just nodded, his legs shaking as he walked toward the girl who looked so much like his dead daughter that it hurt to breathe. Anna Clara looked up from her book, and their eyes met. In that moment, Henry felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. What he didn't know was that this meeting wasn't just chance. It was the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. A story about second chances, lost family, and miracles that happen when you least expect them. But first, Henry would have to uncover a truth that had been buried for 15 years, a truth that would shake everything he thought he knew about his family. Henry couldn't take his eyes off Anna Clara. The girl looked so much like Caroline that his hands were shaking. Sister Mary Catherine noticed his reaction and gently touched his arm. "Mr. Valmont, are you feeling all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "My daughter," Henry whispered. "She looks exactly like my daughter." Anna Clara had noticed them staring and put her book down. As she walked over, Henry could see she even moved like Caroline. It was impossible, yet here she was. "Hello," Anna Clara said politely. "I'm Anna Clara." Henry couldn't speak. Sister Mary Catherine stepped in to help. "Anna Clara, this is Mr. Valmont. He's visiting our orphanage today." Do I know you?" Anna Clara asked, looking confused by Henry's reaction. "You seem familiar somehow." Henry finally found his voice. "When is your birthday?" he asked urgently. "April 15th, Anna Clara replied. "I was left here as a baby." Henry felt his knees go weak. April 15th, the same day Caroline was born. The same day his wife died. "Sister," Henry said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I need to see Anna Clara's records right now." In the orphanage's office, Sister Mary Catherine pulled out an old file. Inside was a yellowed hospital document from 15 years ago. Henry read it with trembling hands. "Baby girl found abandoned. Birth date April 15th, St. Luke's Hospital." St. Luke's, the same hospital where Caroline was born, where Maria had died. "I need to make a call," Henry said, pulling out his phone. He dialed Thomas, his lawyer. "Thomas, I need you to get every record from St. Luke's Hospital from April 15th, 15 years ago. Everything about Maria's delivery, and I mean everything." The next few days were a blur of investigation. Henry visited the orphanage every day, spending time with Anna Clara. Each moment with her convinced him more. This couldn't be a coincidence. Anna Clara was smart and kind, just like Caroline had been. She loved books, just like Caroline. She even had the same little habit of humming when she was happy. "Tell me about your family," Anna Clara asked one day as they sat in the orphanage garden. Henry's heart ached. "I had a wife, Maria, and a daughter, Caroline. They're both gone now." "I'm sorry," Anna Clara said softly. "I've always wondered about my family. The nuns told me I was found at the hospital, but nobody ever came looking for me." A week later, Thomas called Henry in the middle of the night. "Henry, you need to come to my office right now. You won't believe what I found." In Thomas's office, papers were spread all over his desk. Medical records, birth certificates, nurses' notes. "Maria didn't have one baby that day," Thomas said, his voice shaking. "She had twins." Henry felt the room spin. "What?" There was chaos in the delivery room. Maria was hemorrhaging. One baby was healthy, that was Caroline. The other baby appeared to be stillborn. In the rush to save Maria, there was confusion. The second baby was taken away, declared dead. But she wasn't dead, Henry. She was alive. Henry sat down hard in a chair. "Anna Clara." "Yes," Thomas said. "The hospital made a terrible mistake. Instead of double-checking the baby's condition, someone took her to the hospital morgue. A nurse found her crying and, thinking she had been abandoned, took her to the orphanage. The records were confused. Paperwork was lost. Nobody ever connected. The dots." "My God," Henry whispered. "All these years, she was alive. Caroline's twin sister was alive." "There's more," Thomas said quietly. I had DNA tests done using hair samples from Anna Clara's brush at the orphanage. They confirm it. She's your daughter, Henry." Henry put his head in his hands and cried. 15 years. He had lost 15 years with his daughter. The next morning, Henry went to the orphanage early. He found Anna Clara in her usual spot by the window. "Anna Clara," he said gently, "there's something I need to tell you." For the next hour, Henry explained. Everything. About Maria, about Caroline, about the terrible mistake at the hospital. Anna Clara listened in shock, tears rolling down her face. "I'm not an orphan," she whispered. "I have a father." "Yes," Henry said, his voice breaking. "And I promise you, if I had known, if I had any idea you were out there." Anna Clara threw herself into his arms, both of them crying. Sister Mary Catherine watched from the doorway, wiping tears from her eyes. But just when it seemed like everything was finally going right, life had another cruel surprise waiting. Neither Henry nor Anna Clara knew it yet, but their newfound happiness was about to be tested in the most devastating way possible. Because the same genes that had given Anna Clara her mother's beauty and her twin sister's smile had also given her something else, something that was already growing inside her, waiting to tear their world apart just as it was coming together. Moving Anna Clara into the mansion was like bringing sunshine into a dark room. Henry had her bedroom set up next to Caroline's old room, letting her choose everything from the paint colors to the furniture. He wanted her to feel at home, to make up for all the years she'd spent in the orphanage. "This is really all mine?" Anna Clara asked, spinning around in her new room. The walls were painted soft blue, and there was a window seat perfect for reading, just like she'd always dreamed of. "Everything," Henry said, watching her with tears in his eyes. "And there's more. Come with me." He led her down the hall to Caroline's room. The door had been closed since her death, but now Henry opened it slowly. "This was your sister's room," he said softly. "I've kept everything exactly as she left it." Anna Clara walked in quietly, touching the ballet shoes, looking at the photos on the wall. She picked up a framed picture of Caroline. "We really did look exactly alike," she whispered. "You're twins," Henry said. "Caroline would have loved to know she had a sister." Mrs. Martinez helped Anna Clara settle in, showing her around the house and telling her stories about Caroline. The old housekeeper's eyes were often wet with tears. Seeing Anna Clara was like seeing Caroline again. "Your sister loved my chocolate chip cookies," Mrs. Martinez told Anna Clara one afternoon in the kitchen. "Would you like to learn how to make them?" As Anna Clara learned to bake cookies, Henry watched from the doorway. His heart felt full for the first time in years, but there was also fear of losing another daughter, fear that this happiness couldn't last. The press got wind of the story, of course. "Billionaire finds long-lost daughter," screamed the headlines. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates trying to get photos of Anna Clara. "Don't worry about them," Henry told her. "They'll find something else to write about soon." Henry hired tutors to help Anna Clara catch up on her education. She was smart and eager to learn, just like Caroline had been. But sometimes during their lessons, Anna Clara would get tired easily. Henry noticed she was getting paler, thinner. "It's probably just stress," Dr. Peterson said when Henry brought her in for a checkup. "Moving to a new home, all these changes, it's a lot for a young girl." But Henry couldn't shake his worry. One morning he found Anna Clara sitting on the stairs, out of breath after just walking down from her room. "I'm fine, Dad," she said, still getting used to calling him that. "Just a little tired." Henry called Dr. Peterson again. This time, he insisted on a full set of tests. The day they went to the hospital for the results, Anna Clara wore a pink sweater that had belonged to Caroline. She'd found it in her sister's closet and asked if she could wear it. "Of course," Henry had said, his heart twisting at how much she looked like Caroline in it. They sat in Dr. Peterson's office, waiting. Henry held Anna Clara's hand tightly. When the doctor walked in, Henry knew. Immediately something was wrong. He'd seen that look before, 5 years ago, when Dr. Peterson had told him about Caroline's cancer. "No," Henry said before the doctor could speak. "Please, no." Dr. Peterson sat down heavily. "I'm so sorry, Henry. Anna Clara." Anna Clara squeezed her father's hand. "What's wrong with me?" "The tests show abnormal cell growth," Dr. Peterson said gently. "The same type of cancer that Caroline had. It's genetic, passed down from your mother's side." The world seemed to stop. Henry couldn't breathe. Not again. Not his other daughter, too. How bad is it?" Anna Clara asked, her voice small. "It's advanced," Dr. Peterson said. "The symptoms you've been having, the fatigue, the weakness, they're all related to this. We need to start treatment immediately." Henry felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. He'd just found Anna Clara, just started to build a life with her. How could this be happening again? "We'll fight this," he said fiercely, pulling Anna Clara close. "So we beat this once with Caroline. We can—" He stopped, remembering that they hadn't beaten it with Caroline. She had died, slipping away despite all the expensive treatments, all the prayers, all the promises. Anna Clara looked up at him, her eyes full of tears but also determination. "Dad," she said, "tell me about how Caroline fought. Tell me everything. I need to know." That night in Anna Clara's new room, Henry told her about Caroline's battle with cancer, about the treatments, the good days and bad days, the way she never lost hope even at the end. "She was so brave," Henry said, "just like you'll be." Anna Clara touched the pink sweater she was still wearing. "I'll fight for both of us, Dad, for me and for Caroline." But later that night, alone in his study, Henry broke down. He picked up the phone and called Sister Mary Catherine at the orphanage. "Sister," he said, his voice cracking, "I need you to pray harder than you've ever prayed before. I can't lose another daughter. I can't go through this again." Outside his study window, the moon shone on the garden where Anna Clara had been planting flowers just that morning, full of plans for the future. Now those plans, like the tiny seedlings in the garden, seemed terribly fragile. But neither Henry nor Anna Clara knew that their story was far from over. Sometimes the darkest moments come just before a miracle, and faith can grow even in the hardest soil. The cancer treatment center at Memorial Hospital was all too familiar to Henry. 5 years ago, he had walked these same halls with Caroline. Now sitting beside Anna Clara during her first chemotherapy session, he felt like he was living in a terrible repeat of the past. "Tell me more about Caroline," Anna Clara asked, trying to distract herself from the IV in her arm. "What was she like during her treatment?" Henry held her hand, remembering. She never complained. Even on her worst days, she would smile and say tomorrow would be better. "Did she believe in God?" Anna Clara asked quietly. The question caught Henry off guard. Religion had never been important to him. He believed in what he could see and control. Money, business deals, concrete things. I don't know," he admitted. We never really talked about it." "At the orphanage, Sister Mary Catherine taught us that God has a plan for everyone," Anna Clara said, "even when bad things happen." Henry wanted to argue. What kind of plan involved giving cancer to both his daughters? But seeing the peace in Anna Clara's eyes as she talked about her faith, he kept quiet. The first weeks of treatment were brutal. Anna Clara lost her hair just like Caroline had. But unlike Caroline, who had hidden away when her hair fell out, Anna Clara faced it head-on. "Look," she said one morning, holding up clumps of fallen hair. "Now I really look like a cancer patient. Should we shave it all off?" Mrs. Martinez helped them shave Anna Clara's head in the kitchen. As the last of her dark hair fell to the floor, Anna Clara looked in the mirror and smiled. "Now I can start fresh," she said, "like being born again." Henry noticed she wore a small cross necklace that Sister Mary Catherine had given her. She held on to it during her treatments, praying quietly. One particularly bad day, after hours of Anna Clara being sick from the chemotherapy, Henry found her crying in her room. "I'm scared, Dad," she admitted. "I know I should be brave like Caroline, but—" "Hey," Henry sat beside her. "You don't have to be exactly like Caroline. You can be scared. We'll be scared together." Anna Clara wiped her eyes. "Will you pray with me?" Henry hesitated. He hadn't prayed since Maria died, hadn't stepped foot in a church since Caroline's funeral. "I don't know how anymore," he confessed. "It's easy," Anna Clara said, taking his hand. "You just talk to God like he's sitting right here with us." So Henry found himself praying for the first time in years, awkwardly at first, then with growing desperation. "Please," he whispered, "please don't take her too." Sister Mary Catherine visited often, bringing other nuns and children from the orphanage. They filled Anna Clara's room with hand-drawn cards and small gifts. "Your old bed is still empty," Sister Mary Catherine told her. "We're keeping it that way until you're better and can come visit." The doctors were amazed by Anna Clara's spirit. Even on days when the pain was bad, she would ask to be wheeled around the cancer ward to visit other patients. She read stories to the younger children, shared her faith with teenagers like herself, and somehow managed to bring light into the darkest places. "She's different from most patients I see," Dr. Peterson told Henry one day. "There's something special about her." But the cancer was aggressive, just as it had been with Caroline. The treatments that were supposed to make Anna Clara better seemed to be making her worse. One night, after a particularly rough day of treatment, Henry found Anna Clara in Caroline's room. She was sitting on the bed, holding Caroline's old teddy, Bear. "Do you think she knows about me?" Anna Clara asked. "Do you think she can see us from heaven?" Henry sat beside her, his heart aching. "I hope so. I talk to her sometimes," Anna Clara admitted. "When the pain is really bad, I imagine her, holding my hand, telling me to be strong." Henry looked at his daughter, this miracle he had found only to risk losing again. In the soft evening light, with her bald head and thin face, she looked so much like Caroline in her final days. "Dad," Anna Clara said suddenly, "I need you to promise me something. Anything. If I don't make it like Caroline." She started. "Don't," Henry interrupted. "Don't talk like that." "No, listen," Anna Clara insisted. "If I don't make it, I don't want you to close yourself off again. I don't want Caroline's room and my room to become sad museums. I want you to live, to help other people, to believe in miracles." Henry couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. How had he gotten so lucky? To have not one but two daughters with such beautiful souls. That night, after Anna Clara had fallen asleep, Henry did something he never thought he would do. He drove to St. Mary's Church near the orphanage. The church was empty and dark, but he went in anyway. Kneeling in the quiet church, Henry finally let himself break down completely. "I don't know if you're real," he whispered into the darkness. "But Anna Clara believes in you. She sees you in everything, even in this terrible situation. Please, please show me what she sees. Please help me understand. Please save my daughter." As he left the church, he noticed something he'd never seen. Before, a small garden with roses blooming in the moonlight. One white rose caught his eye, perfect and glowing in the dark. Like hope blooming in the darkest night, like faith growing in the hardest heart, like miracles waiting to happen. If only you believed they could. The morning started like any other at Memorial Hospital. Henry walked the familiar path to Anna, Clara's room, carrying her favorite herbal tea from Mrs. Martinez. But today was different. Today they would get the results of her latest tests. "Good morning, sunshine," Henry said, entering the room. He stopped short when he saw Anna Clara, kneeling beside her bed, praying. "Just a minute, Dad," she said softly, finishing her prayer. When she looked up, her face was peaceful despite how thin and pale she had become. "The doctors are coming soon," Henry reminded her, helping her back into bed. "I know," Anna Clara said. "I was just asking God to give us strength for whatever news they bring." Henry's heart squeezed. Over the past weeks, he had found himself joining Anna Clara in prayer more and more often. It wasn't that he suddenly believed in miracles. He just couldn't resist the peace he saw in her face when she prayed. Dr. Peterson arrived with his team of doctors. Henry knew all their faces by now, had memorized their expressions. Today, something was different. They looked confused. "We've reviewed your latest scans," Dr. Peterson said, putting the images up on the lightboard. "And honestly, we're having trouble explaining what we're seeing." Henry's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "The tumor," Dr. Peterson pointed to the scan. "It's shrinking, not just a little, but significantly. This kind of response to treatment, it's extremely rare with this type of cancer." Anna Clara squeezed Henry's hand. "See, Dad? Miracles do happen." But the doctors weren't finished. They ordered more tests, more scans. They brought in specialists from other hospitals. Everyone wanted to understand what was happening. It's not just the tumor, one specialist explained. Her blood work shows improvement too. It's like her whole body is fighting back in a way we've never seen before. Henry remembered Caroline's treatment, how each test had brought worse news, how hope had slipped away bit by bit. This was different. This was something he couldn't explain. Sister Mary Catherine visited that afternoon, bringing news from the orphanage. "The children have been praying for you every day," she told Anna Clara. "We've had a prayer chain going non-stop." "I can feel it," Anna Clara said. "Sometimes, when the pain is really bad, I feel this warmth, like I'm being hugged by 100 people at once." That night, Henry found himself back at St. Mary's Church. This time he wasn't alone. Mrs. Martinez had asked to come with him. "I've worked for your family for 20 years, she said as they sat in the quiet church. "I've seen so much pain, but I've never seen anything like Anna Clara. She has something special, Mr. Henry, a light inside her." Henry thought about the white rose he'd seen blooming in the moonlight weeks ago. The garden was full of roses now, all shapes and colors. "I don't understand it," he admitted. "The doctors can't explain it, but something is happening." "Faith isn't about understanding," Mrs. Martinez said gently. "It's about believing, even when we don't understand." Back at the hospital, Anna Clara was getting stronger every day. Her hair was starting to grow back, soft, dark fuzz covering her head. She had more energy, more appetite. The nurses called her their miracle girl. One afternoon, Henry walked in to find her sitting by the window, writing in a journal, "Sister Mary." Catherine had given her. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Letters to Caroline," Anna Clara said, "telling her about everything that's happening, about how much I wish I could have known her." Henry sat beside her, reading over her shoulder. "Dear Caroline, today the doctors said my blood work looks better. Dad tried not to cry, but I saw him wiping his eyes. I think he's starting to believe in miracles too. I wish you could see how he's changing. Remember that closed-off sad man I met at the orphanage? He's different now. He prays with me every night. He talks about you with a smile instead of tears. I think maybe that's part of God's plan too, not just making me better, but healing." Dad's heart. Henry had to turn away, overwhelmed by emotion. He walked to the window, looking out at the hospital garden below. A group of cancer patients was having an art therapy session, painting pictures in the sunshine. "Want to go down there?" Anna Clara asked. "I feel strong enough to walk today." It was a small thing, walking to the garden. But 6 weeks ago, Anna Clara had been too weak to stand. Now here she was, taking slow but steady steps beside him. In the garden, Anna Clara picked up a paintbrush. On her canvas, she painted 3 figures holding hands, a man and 2 girls standing in a garden, full of roses. "That's us," she said, "you, me and Caroline, all together in heaven's garden." A nurse walked by, checking Anna Clara's IV pole. "Dr. Peterson is looking for you," she said. "He has your latest test results." Henry felt the old fear grip his heart, but Anna Clara just smiled, squeezing his hand. "Whatever the news is," she said, "we'll face it together, with faith." They walked back to her room, where Dr. Peterson was waiting with a stack of papers and a look of amazement on his face. What he was about to tell them would change everything, but that moment in the garden with the painting of 3 figures among the roses would stay with Henry forever. Because sometimes the biggest miracles aren't just about healing bodies. Sometimes they're about healing hearts, about finding faith in the darkest places, about learning to see the world through new eyes. Dr. Peterson spread the test results across Anna Clara's hospital bed, his hands shaking with excitement. Henry and Anna Clara held hands tightly as they listened to his words. "I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, Dr. Peterson said, "and I've never seen anything like this. The cancer, it's practically gone." "Gone?" Henry repeated, not daring to believe it. "The tumors have shrunk by more than 90%, Dr. Peterson explained. Your blood work is almost normal. It's like your body has suddenly remembered how to fight back." Anna Clara touched her cross necklace, tears rolling down her cheeks. "God heard us, Dad. He really heard us." Henry pulled her close, his own tears falling freely. He remembered sitting in this same hospital 5 years ago, hearing the opposite news about Caroline. The memory of that day would always hurt, but now it was mixed with something new, hope. The news spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses who had cared for Anna Clara came to hug her. Other patients and their families stopped by to share in the joy. Someone started calling her the Miracle Girl of Memorial Hospital, and the nickname stuck. Mrs. Martinez prepared a special dinner to celebrate, bringing it to the hospital in containers. As they ate together in Anna Clara's room, Henry noticed how much stronger she looked. Her cheeks had color again, and she had eaten more in one sitting than she had in weeks. "I want to do something," Anna Clara announced during dinner. "I want to help other cancer patients, like a support group or something." Henry smiled, remembering how she used to visit other patients even when she was at her sickest. "We can set that up. Maybe we could even start a foundation." "The Caroline and Anna Clara Foundation," she said softly, "to help kids with cancer and their families." That night, after Anna Clara had fallen asleep, Henry sat in the hospital chapel. It was becoming his favorite place to think. The quiet room, with its flickering candles, reminded him of St. Mary's Church. Sister Mary Catherine found him there. She had rushed over as soon as she heard the news about Anna Clara's tests. "When I first met you, Mr. Valmont," she said, sitting beside him, "you were a man who believed only in what money could buy. Now look at you, sitting in a chapel, planning a foundation to help others." Henry smiled. "Anna Clara changed everything. She made me see the world differently." "That's what faith does," Sister Mary Catherine said. "It opens our eyes to miracles." The next morning, reporters gathered outside the hospital. The story of the billionaire's long-lost daughter, who miraculously recovered from cancer, was too good to ignore. But Henry and Anna Clara had a different priority. They visited the children's cancer ward where Anna Clara had spent so much time during her treatment. She went from bed to bed, talking to the young patients, sharing her story, praying with those who wanted to pray. "See this?" she would say, touching her growing hair. "A few weeks ago I was as sick as you are, but miracles happen. You just have to believe." One little girl, barely 7 years old, looked up at Anna Clara with big eyes. "Did it hurt, the medicine?" "Yes," Anna Clara answered honestly. "But you know what helped? Imagining that my sister Caroline was holding my hand. Even though she's in heaven, I felt her with me. Do you have anyone in heaven watching over you?" The little girl nodded. "My grandma." "Then imagine her holding your hand during the hard parts," Anna Clara said, "and know that I'll be praying for you too." Henry watched from the doorway, his heart full. This was his daughter, strong, compassionate, full of faith. She had faced death and come back stronger, not bitter. Later that day, Dr. Peterson called them into his office. More test results had come back. "We've been studying your case, Anna Clara," he said. "Your recovery. It's not just unusual, it's unprecedented. We're writing a paper about it for medical journals. Will it help other patients?" Anna Clara asked. "We hope so. Something in your body's response to the treatment could help us understand how to fight this type of cancer more effectively." On their way home, Anna Clara was finally strong enough to go home. They stopped at St. Mary's Church. The rose garden was in full bloom, white roses everywhere. "Look, Dad," Anna Clara said, pointing to a particular bush. Among all the white roses, a single pink rose was blooming. "Caroline's favorite color," Henry whispered. They stood there in the garden, father and daughter, surrounded by roses and memories and miracles. The sun was setting, painting the sky in beautiful colors. "You know what I think?" Anna Clara said. "I think Caroline had a hand in this. I think she asked God to save me." Henry looked at his daughter, this precious gift he had almost lost twice, first to a hospital mistake and then to cancer. She was right. Somewhere in all of this, Caroline's love had played a part. "The Caroline and Anna Clara Foundation," he said, "will help other families fight cancer. We'll give them hope, show them that miracles still happen." Anna Clara hugged him tight. "And we'll tell them about Caroline, about how her love reached across heaven to help heal her sister." As they walked back to the car, Henry looked back at the garden. The pink rose seemed to glow in the fading light like a sign, like a blessing, like a sister's love blooming among the miracles. The Valmont mansion was full of life again. 6 months after Anna Clara's miraculous recovery, the house buzzed with activity, as volunteers and foundation staff worked to set up the Caroline and Anna Clara Foundation's first official event. "Where do you want these photos, Miss Valmont?" asked Sarah, one of the new foundation employees, holding up a large framed photograph of Caroline. Anna Clara, now healthy and strong with her dark hair growing past her shoulders, carefully took the photo. "This one goes right here," she said, pointing to the entrance hall. "I want everyone who comes in to see my sister's smile." Henry watched from his office as Anna Clara directed the preparations. She had thrown herself into the foundation work with incredible energy, insisting on being involved in every detail. The difference between the scared girl he'd found in the orphanage and the confident young woman she'd become still amazed him. Mrs. Martinez came in with his morning coffee. "She's just like you, Mr. Henry, a natural leader." "No," Henry smiled. "She's better. She leads with her heart." The Foundation's first project was bigger than anything Henry had initially imagined. Anna Clara had insisted on not just helping cancer patients, but also supporting orphaned children and families separated by hospital mistakes. "We have to make sure no other families go through what we did," she had said. "No more lost children, no more separated twins." The morning of Aoidib, the Foundation's launch event arrived bright and clear. The mansion's gardens, where just months ago Anna Clara had been too weak to walk, were now filled with chairs and decorated with white and pink roses. Sister Mary Catherine arrived early with a group of children from the orphanage. Anna Clara ran to hug them all, her face glowing with health and happiness. "Look at you," Sister Mary Catherine exclaimed. "God's miracles are truly visible in you, my dear." Dr. Peterson came too, bringing the final draft of the medical paper about Anna Clara's case. The journal was publishing it next month, and hospitals around the country were already reaching out to learn more about her unprecedented recovery. "Your case is going to change how we treat this type of cancer," he told Anna Clara. "You're giving hope to so many families." As guests began to arrive, cancer survivors, orphanage directors, hospital administrators, and families touched by similar stories, Henry stood at the podium to give his opening speech. "A year ago," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I was a man who believed only in what money could buy. I had lost my wife, Maria, and my daughter, Caroline, and I thought I had nothing left to live for." He paused, looking at Anna Clara, who sat in the front row, tears in her eyes. "Then God sent me an angel. He led me to St. Mary's Orphanage, where I found not just my long-lost daughter, but also my faith. Through Anna Clara's battle with cancer, the same disease that took her twin sister, I learned that miracles still happen, that love is stronger than death, that faith can move mountains." In the audience, Mrs. Martinez wiped her eyes. Sister Mary Catherine held her rosary, nodding, along with Henry's words. "Today," Henry continued, "we're launching the Caroline and Anna Clara Foundation. Our mission is simple: to help families facing cancer, to support orphaned children, and to make sure no family is ever separated by hospital mistakes again." Anna Clara joined him at the podium, beautiful in a pink dress that matched the roses in the garden. "Caroline should be here with us today," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But I believe she is here in spirit. Every time we help a sick child, every time we reunite a family, every time we give someone hope, she's there. And so is God, working through us to create more miracles." As if on cue, a warm breeze swept through the garden, making the roses dance. Several people gasped as white rose petals floated through the air like tiny blessings. After the speeches, Anna Clara led tours of the Foundation's new offices, set up in a renovated wing of the mansion. One room was dedicated to Caroline, filled with her photos and memories. Another was a prayer room open to anyone who needed a quiet place to find hope. "This is just the beginning," Anna Clara told a group of parents whose children were fighting cancer. "We're going to be here for you every step of the way, because miracles don't just happen once, they multiply when we share them." Later that evening, after all the guests had gone, Henry found Anna Clara in Caroline's room. She was sitting on the bed, holding the old teddy bear and smiling. I had a dream about her last night, Anna Clara said. Caroline. She was dancing in a garden full of roses, and she was so happy, Dad. She told me to tell you that everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. Henry sat beside her, picking up one of Caroline's old ballet shoes. You know, he said, I used to think losing Caroline was the end of my story, but it was just the beginning. God had to break my heart so he could fill it with something bigger. With you, with faith, with this foundation. Anna Clara leaned against his shoulder. And there are more miracles to come. I can feel it. Outside, the sun was setting on their first day as official miracle makers. The garden roses glowed in the golden light, white and pink together, like sisters finally united in a single purpose, to bring hope to those who needed it most. 3 months after the foundation's launch, Henry sat in his office reviewing letters from families they had helped. One particular story caught his attention. A single mother named Rachel, whose 6-year-old daughter Emma had the same type of cancer that had affected Caroline and Anna Clara. Dad? Anna Clara burst into the office, her face glowing with excitement. You need to come to the hospital right now. Emma's latest tests came back. Henry grabbed his coat, remembering the day they'd met Rachel and Emma. They had been at the ISE, end of their hope, out of money, with Emma getting weaker every day. The foundation had stepped in, not just paying for treatment, but also giving them a place to stay near the hospital. At Memorial Hospital, they found Rachel in the chapel, crying and laughing at the same time. The tumors are shrinking, she said when she saw them. Just like with Anna Clara. The doctors can't explain it. Emma was in her room coloring pictures of roses. She had lost her hair to chemotherapy, but her eyes sparkled with life. When she saw Anna Clara, she jumped up to hug her. Miss Anna, Emma said, look what I drew. It's you and me and your sister Caroline in Heaven's Garden. Anna Clara looked at the child's drawing. 3 figures surrounded by pink and white roses. It was so similar to the painting she had made during her own treatment that tears came to her eyes. It's beautiful, Emma, she said. And guess what? The medicine is working. You're getting better. Back in the hallway, Dr. Peterson pulled Henry aside. We're using the treatment protocol we developed from Anna Clara's case. The results, they're remarkable. Not just with Emma, but with other patients too. Henry watched through the window as Anna Clara and Emma colored together. God's not done with the miracles yet, he said quietly. Later that day, they received another visitor at the foundation, a young nurse named Maria, like Henry's late wife, who worked at St. Luke's Hospital where the twins had been born. I read about your story, Maria said, twisting her hands nervously, about how your twins were separated by a hospital mistake. I think something similar might be happening at our hospital. Anna Clara leaned forward. What do you mean? There's a baby in the NICU. The records don't match. Something's wrong, but my supervisors won't listen. I didn't know who else to turn to. Henry and Anna Clara exchanged looks. This was exactly why they had started the foundation, to prevent other families from suffering what they had. Tell us everything, Henry said. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The foundation's legal team investigated the hospital records. They discovered not just one case, but several instances of mismatched records and potential mix-ups. We have to fix this, Anna Clara insisted. Every child deserves to know where they came from. They worked with the hospital administration, implementing new safety protocols and double-checking old records. 3 families were reunited with babies they thought they had lost. The press called it the miracle at St. Luke's. One evening, after a long day of meetings and emotional family reunions, Henry found Anna Clara in the foundation's prayer room. She was lighting candles, one for each family they had helped. You know what I realized, Dad, she said. When I was sick, I prayed for a miracle. God gave us one. But he didn't just heal me, he gave us a mission. Every family we help is another miracle. Mrs. Martinez brought them tea, adding her own candle to the collection. I remember when this house was so quiet and sad, she said. Now it's full of life and hope. The foundation was growing faster than they had expected. They had already helped 50 families with cancer treatment, reunited 5 separated families, and supported 3 orphanages. But it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the stories, the lives changed, the hope restored. Sister Mary Catherine visited regularly, bringing updates from St. Mary's Orphanage. The foundation had renovated the orphanage's medical facilities and started a college fund for the children. "Remember when you first came to us?" she asked Henry. "You were looking for an heir, but God had bigger plans. He gave you not just a daughter, but a whole new family, all these people whose lives you're touching." That night, Henry walked in the garden, now twice its original size with even more roses. A new section had been added, the Miracle Garden, where families could plant a rose bush when their child recovered or when a lost child was found. Emma's mother, Rachel, was there, planting a pink rose bush. Her daughter was in remission now, her recovery following the same miraculous pattern as Anna Clara's. "I never believed in miracles before," Rachel said, patting the soil around the roses, "but now I see them everywhere." Anna Clara joined them, carrying a watering can. She looked so healthy, so strong. It was hard to believe she had ever been sick. Her dark hair now reached past her shoulders, and she wore it in the same style Caroline used to wear. "Each rose represents a life changed," she said, watering the newly planted bush. "And they'll keep blooming year after year, reminding everyone that miracles still happen." In the fading light, the white and pink roses seemed to glow. A warm breeze carried their scent, the scent of hope, of healing, of miracles multiplying, in ways no one could have imagined. "Caroline would be so proud," Henry said, putting his arm around Anna Clara. "Of you, of all of this." Anna Clara smiled. "She is proud, Dad. I can feel it. Every time we help someone, every time we bring a family together, every time we give someone hope, she's right here with us in Heaven's garden." The autumn wind scattered rose petals across the foundation's parking lot as Dr. Peterson's car pulled up unexpectedly one Sunday morning. Henry and Anna Clara were having their usual breakfast on the patio when Mrs. Martinez announced his arrival. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," Dr. Peterson said, his face unusually serious, "but we need to talk." Anna Clara reached for her father's hand as they sat in the study listening to the doctor's news. A pharmaceutical company had reviewed their medical paper about Anna Clara's recovery and found something disturbing. "They're claiming it's impossible," Dr. Peterson explained. "They say the test results must have been manipulated. They're demanding an investigation." Henry felt his anger rising. "That's ridiculous. We were all there. We saw her recovery with our own eyes." "I know," Dr. Peterson said, "but they're powerful. They're threatening to discredit the treatment protocol we developed. If that happens, insurance companies might stop covering it." Anna Clara stood up, her face pale but determined. "All those children we're helping, Emma and the others, what will happen to them?" "Nothing yet," Dr. Peterson assured her, "but we need to fight this." The news hit the press the next day. Miracle recovery questioned, Valmont Foundation under investigation. Reporters camped outside the gates again, but this time they weren't telling a story of hope. "Why would they do this?" Anna Clara asked. That night as they sat in the prayer room. "Why try to stop something that's helping people?" Henry wished he had an answer. In his business life, he had seen how greed could make people do terrible things. But this felt different. This felt like an attack on hope itself. Sister Mary Catherine arrived the next morning, bringing a bus full of children from the orphanage. Despite the reporters outside, despite the crisis, the Foundation's work had to continue. "Remember Job in the Bible?" Sister Mary Catherine said, as they watched the children play in the garden. God allowed him to be tested, but his faith never wavered, and in the end, his blessings multiplied. Anna Clara took strength from those words. Instead of hiding from the controversy, she decided to face it head-on. She called a press conference in the Miracle Garden. The reporters fell silent as Anna Clara stepped up to the microphones. She had grown into such a poised young woman, Henry thought proudly. Caroline would have been just like her. "A year ago, I was dying in that hospital," Anna Clara began, her voice clear and strong. "The same cancer that took my twin sister was killing me, but God had other plans. My recovery wasn't just about me. It was about bringing hope to others." She gestured to the families gathered behind her, Emma and Rachel, the reunited parents from St. Luke's, children from the orphanage. "Ah, you can investigate all you want," she continued. "You can question the medical records, but you can't question these lives. You can't question these stories. You can't question the power of faith and love." Emma, now healthy and with her hair growing back, ran up to stand beside Anna Clara. One by one, other cancer survivors joined them. Parents held up photos of their recovered children. The miracle garden filled with people whose lives had been touched by the foundation. Rachel stepped forward to speak. "My daughter was dying. The doctors had given up hope. Then we found the Valmont Foundation. Today, Emma is cancer-free. Call it medicine. Call it a miracle. I call it love in action." The pharmaceutical company hadn't expected this response. They hadn't expected to face not just medical records, but real people with real stories. The investigation continued, but something shifted in the public perception. Letters and emails poured in from around the country, more stories of recoveries, more families helped by the foundation's work. Dr. Peterson brought in independent researchers to verify their results. The treatment protocol was working, again and again. One evening, as the crisis was reaching its peak, Henry found Anna Clara in Caroline's room. She was holding her sister's ballet shoes and smiling. "I had another dream about her," Anna Clara said. "Caroline told me not to worry. She said that sometimes God allows storms so we can show others how to find shelter." Henry sat beside her, remembering how far they had come. From that first meeting at the orphanage to Anna Clara's illness, from her miraculous recovery to the foundation's work, every step had strengthened their faith. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think this attack is actually a blessing in disguise. It's forcing us to show the world that miracles aren't just stories, they're real, they happen every day." The next morning brought unexpected support. Other hospitals around the country began releasing their own data, showing similar successes with the treatment protocol. Medical journals published peer reviews confirming their findings. But the most powerful moment came when Emma walked into the foundation office carrying a stack of drawings. "Look what I made," she said, spreading them out on the table. Each picture showed the same scene, the miracle garden full of roses, with people helping each other and angels watching from above. "But that's Caroline," Emma said, pointing to one of the angels. "Miss Anna told me about her. She helps God make miracles happen." Anna Clara hugged the little girl, tears in her eyes. "Yes, she does. And you know what? Every time someone tries to stop a miracle, God just makes an even bigger one." Outside, the autumn wind had died down. The roses in the miracle garden stood tall and strong, white and pink petals glowing in the sunlight. Like faith tested and proven true, like love that grows stronger through challenges, like miracles that multiply when you believe. 1 year to the day after Anna Clara's miraculous recovery, the Valmont mansion grounds were transformed once again. This time it wasn't just the miracle garden in bloom. The entire estate had become a celebration of life, hope, and faith. "Can you believe how much has happened in just 1 year?" Anna Clara asked, standing with Henry in Caroline's room. They were both dressed up for the foundation's first anniversary celebration. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself," Henry admitted, straightening his tie, "to make sure it's not all a dream." The investigation into Anna Clara's recovery had ended up bringing more attention to their work than ever before. The pharmaceutical company had not only withdrawn their accusations, but had also pledged support for the foundation's research program. Mrs. Martinez knocked on the door. "They're ready for you downstairs, and you won't believe who just arrived." In the entrance hall, Sister Mary Catherine stood with an elderly nun that Henry had never seen before. But Anna Clara gasped when she saw her. "Sister Angela," she ran to hug the old nun. "I can't believe you're here." "I wouldn't miss this day," Sister Angela said. "I was there when you were first brought to St. Mary's Orphanage as a baby. I always knew God had special plans for you." The foundation's anniversary celebration was bigger than anyone had expected. Hundreds of people filled the gardens, families they had helped, medical professionals, orphanage children, and supporters from around the country. Dr. Peterson stood with a group of doctors who had adopted the treatment protocol. Emma, now completely cancer-free, played with other recovered children in a special playground the foundation had built. "Look at all these roses," Rachel said, walking with Anna Clara through the miracle garden. Each one represents a life changed, a prayer answered. The garden had grown so much that it now wrapped around the entire mansion. White and pink roses bloomed everywhere, their sweet scent filling the air. Henry took the podium for his speech. Looking out at the sea of faces, each person there had their own story of hope, their own miracle to share. "1 year ago," he began, "we launched this foundation in memory of my daughter Caroline and in celebration of her twin sister, Anna Clara's recovery. We thought we were starting a charity. Instead, we were becoming part of something much bigger, a movement of faith, hope, and love." He paused, looking at Anna Clara, who sat in the front row, healthy and beautiful in a pink dress. "In the past year, our treatment protocol has helped over 200 children fight cancer. We've reunited 15 families separated by hospital mistakes. We've supported 10 orphanages, but numbers don't tell the real story." He gestured to Emma, who came forward holding a large photo album. "This book contains letters from every family we've helped. Every story is different, but they all share one thing: faith. Faith in God, faith in each other, faith in miracles." Anna Clara joined him at the podium, bringing something covered with a cloth. "Today," she said, "we're unveiling something special. A reminder that every storm leads to something beautiful if you just believe." She pulled away the cloth to reveal a beautiful stained glass window. It showed 3 figures in a rose garden, 2 young women and a man, with angels, watching from above. The light shining through it cast pink and white shadows on the ground, like rose petals. "This window will hang in our new chapel," Anna Clara explained, "a place where anyone can come to pray, to hope, to believe in miracles." Sister Mary Catherine stepped forward with Sister Angela. Together with Henry and Anna Clara, they cut the ribbon to officially open the chapel doors. Inside, more stained glass windows told their story: the twins' birth, their separation, Anna Clara's time at the Orphanage, her reunion with Henry, her battle with cancer and her recovery. "But the story isn't over," Anna Clara said to the crowd. "Every day, God writes new chapters through each of you. Every life touched, every prayer answered, every family reunited. These are all part of Caroline's legacy." As if on cue, a warm breeze swept through the chapel, making the roses outside dance. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting everyone in colors of hope. Later that evening, after most guests had left, Henry found Anna Clara in the miracle garden. She was sitting on a bench, looking up at the stars. "Dad," she said softly, "I saw Caroline today. Not in a dream this time, I really felt her here with us." Henry sat beside her. "I felt her too. She's happy," Anna Clara continued. "Happy that her death wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Every person we help, every life we touch, it's all part of her love living on." They sat together in the garden, surrounded by roses and memories and miracles. The chapel lights cast a gentle glow, its stained glass windows telling their story to the night. "Do you know what I've learned?" Henry said. "Miracles aren't just about healing bodies, they're about healing hearts, bringing people together, showing us that love never really dies." Anna Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "And they never end. Each miracle leads to another and another, like roses blooming season after season." In the distance, children's laughter could still be heard from the playground. Emma's voice rang out, singing a song she had learned at the foundation. High above, stars twinkled like angels' eyes. A shooting star streaked across the sky, a reminder that heaven was watching, that Caroline was watching, that miracles were still happening. "Thank you, God," Henry whispered, "for everything." Anna Clara squeezed his hand. "For Caroline, for finding each other, for second chances. For teaching us to believe," Henry added. Together they looked out over their garden of miracles, white and pink roses glowing in the starlight, promises of hope blooming eternal, love's legacy growing stronger with each passing day. The end.